I think we'll get started here. Some of you I know, but let me introduce myself if I may. I'm Thad Holcomb. I'm going to be moderating this Earth Care Forum. And this is, of course, a forum on the construction of tiny homes at the Lawrence Community Shelter. I will come back and introduce the presenter in just a few moments. I want to give a brief introduction as far as the history of these Earth Care Forums. They've been going on now for, maybe 6 years or so, but this is the first time we've, of course, doing Zoom, as many people are doing this. It's coordinated by the ECO team of the First Presbyterian Church in Lawrence, and First Presbyterian Church is an Earth Care congregation, which is a congregation that is required to certify itself by being involved in eco-justice concerns, both in worship and education, in the plant itself, the church building, and also in outreach. But just as important is First Presbyterian is a member of LETUS, Lawrence Ecology Teams United in Sustainability, and that's made up of an interfaith group of communities, the Lawrence Jewish Community Congregation, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation here in Lawrence, Plymouth Congregational, the Friends Meeting, the Quakers, St. John the Evangelist Catholic Parish, Trinity Episcopal, and Islamic Center of Lawrence. So that is an important connection that we have as far as reaching out for advocacy on equal justice and education. Now today, our presenter, we're really fortunate to have Professor Dan Rockhill. He's a distinguished professor of architecture at KU, and he is the executive director of Studio 804. He'll explain that a little bit more. He and his students have designed and built 14 leadership in energy and environmental design platinum buildings in Kansas, and also completed 3 Passive Institute certifications. He may comment on those. They have won numerous international design awards, including 3 American Institute of Architects Honor Awards, 2 Wood Design Awards, 2-time winner of the also other prizes, NCARB. You'll have to translate that, Dan, later, maybe a little bit. And he is the 2-time winner of Architectural Magazine's Home of the Year, including their 218 Sustainable House at 12th Street here in Lawrence, Kansas. He is tightly bound to the natural milieu and culture of the Kansas region, and in the spirit of regionalism, the area's architectural form, Spartan aesthetics, frugal methods, and relationship to nature. I think you'll see all of this in his presentation, but he has most generously agreed to be the person that's designing, and his students will be constructing the tiny homes, the Monarch project at the Lawrence Community Shelter. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan and let him do that. And then if you have questions, would you please just put them on the chat line? And when he kind of completes his presentation, we'll check that and ask him particular questions off the chat line. And that way we'll have a chance to have some conversation as we continue. So Dan, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction, and bear with me while we change some settings, and you're going to let me share your screen.
Yep.
And I'm going to take it myself and okay, are we good? Is everybody comfortable with their screen? And you should see the first slide says Studio 804, I hope. So thank you to the organizers of the Earth Care Forums for the invitation to share what I do. This morning, I'll give you an overview of the program I operate at KU, known as Studio 804. And eventually share with you our current project, which is the Monarch Village located at the Lawrence Community Shelter. But before that, I'd like to just sketch out how I came to this point in my career. Many years ago, I was teaching a design studio called Architecture 804. And it's the last design studio that graduate students take at KU before graduating with a master's degree in architecture. It was not an easy teaching experience. They thought they already knew it all. They wanted to work on their portfolios, and I was blocking them from moving on with their lives. I managed, but I felt like I could do more. Oh boy. Let's see, we seem to be, I'd like to continue with the next slide. There we go. So at one class meeting, I was complaining about not being able to keep up with some pressing work that Rockhill and Associates was asked to do at an old schoolhouse that needed a roof, the barber school. So I run a business, Rockhill and Associates, and we do all of our own designing and building, kind of a one-stop shop. So the students said they would like to do it. And that's how it started. They were wild about the experience, and I never forgot about it. They were pulling their cars up to surround the building with their headlights on at night so they could work. And it was a noticeable difference. And I was convinced that I was onto something they desperately wanted to learn more about. So with that experience as my inspiration and the encouragement of our faculty, I started doing design build with students. And not unlike Rockhill and Associates, we do everything and subcontract very little, if anything. Eventually, with a few experimental projects under my belt, I went to the city of Lawrence and said, I have some eager builders and you have an affordable housing initiative. Why don't we work together? And they said, yes. So we did several projects in Lawrence and eventually went to Kansas City. It was hard to find property that was available here in Lawrence, whereas in Kansas City, they would give us the property. In addition, following several years of growth, building small projects, it was time to formalize the course and strengthen its integration into the architecture curriculum. In 2002, we formed the 501c3 not-for-profit corporation, created a board of directors, and struck an affiliation agreement with the University of Kansas. This agreement basically stated that KU wanted nothing more to do with us than recognize us as an anomaly to most other academic offerings. They said, we know Studio 804 supports the mission of the School of Architecture, and so do we. But we're not going to give you any money and pick up any liability, so good luck. Although I didn't think it at the time, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. So as I stated, I left Lawrence and went to Kansas City. If you look at this large map, each dot represents 5 vacant parcels. Now this is Kansas City, Kansas. And it's not necessarily vacant of structure, but more than likely of taxes paid. So it followed that if I'm not supported by the university any further than what I've described, I better run this more as a business because I couldn't go on begging year after year to get financial support, the uncertainty that comes along with it. I was working with community development corporations, a glorified name for neighborhood associations, most notably El Centro in the heart of downtown Kansas City, Kansas, to pay for the projects, but with a new goal now of becoming financially independent. So I found a niche market for our houses in Kansas City. Kenny and Leah, pictured in the upper right, purchased the house on the left. Our demographic was directed toward young, upwardly mobile people who didn't want to live in suburbia, preferred the inner city, read Dwell magazine, and wanted something modern, not the builder's interpretation of what they thought the market was. Although I don't do projects for clients directly, I had a waiting list for our projects and never had to advertise. We couldn't build them fast enough. The city gave us the property and we were successfully getting people back into the older parts of the urban area. Builders noticed and started doing knockoffs on our projects, as you can see in the lower right. Today, all of our projects are funded with the corporation and studio. So I started with nothing and have managed to save enough money over the course of 25 years to be a developer, able to buy property, purchase the materials to build the project, sell it, put the proceeds back in savings to start all over again, which is how now I have eventually found myself able to make the donation to the Lawrence Community Shelter. Students give up winter break and still do start up with me the first week of the new year, so we could have a finished project by graduation, the third weekend of May. A 5-month window to do all that is involved, was really pushing it. Fortunately, students didn't take other classes and our faculty were supportive of what I was trying to do. With such a compressed time frame for production, I needed a way to produce the buildings inside and avoid the bad winter weather. I also wanted to avoid students racing back and forth on the interstate, so I decided to prefabricate the projects in Lawrence and truck them to our different sites each year in Kansas City. Incidentally, I'm doing one project a year. So we leased a warehouse, now the location of Van Gogh Arts on New Jersey Street, and got to work. Here you can see how we'll take them apart. And we put them on wheels and rushed them out of our East Lawrence warehouse, load them on flatbed trucks and take them to Kansas City, crane them into position, and put them back together. This little house won Home of the Year award from Architecture Magazine in a competition with professional architects. The submissions are made with your identity completely obscured so that we are competing with professionals submitting multi-million-dollar projects from around the world. It was quite a hit, and we had a nice write-up in the New York Times. We continue doing all of our own work, even on site-built projects. This one was just a couple of years ago on 12th Street. I don't do this to make them better, to make them builders, but rather to make them better architects. The general public usually assumes that surely an architect's education includes some exposure to building, but not very long ago, that was not the case here at KU and at most other schools around the world. I do this because I've seen a change in young people over the course of my teaching career that, in my opinion, is not for the better. These kids in the photo are having an experience that few young people have anymore, as we are a consumer-oriented society that has arguably deprived kids of this hands-on life experience in favor of a virtual experience with their hands on the phone. I have very different students today when compared to the students I had when the program started. Not better or worse, just different. This is what the Treefort experience has become. We snapped together a Fisher-Price kit from Walmart. Anything today that requires much thought has been replaced by creating convenience at the expense of figuring things out and discovering the pleasure inherent in just that. It's pervasive. We even have a Halloween store in Lawrence, Kansas, so no one is inconvenienced by having to solve a problem creatively, like the ones you see here. Instead, you can buy what you want and not have to give it any more thought. The literature supports this, and I see it creeping into how they think about architecture. For the most part, today, we simply pick things off the internet to assemble our buildings. Unfortunately, I had to interrupt that good run on Kansas City development and answer a calling that many encouraged me to follow. We went to Greensburg in 2007-8, following a Category F5 tornado that devastated this little town and left 11 people dead in its wake. On the left, you see an aerial view of the town before, and on the right is right after the tornado. So I'm in a helicopter here, and Greensburg is in the middle, and 40 miles to the right is Dodge City. 35 miles to the left is Pratt, and nothing in between. The tornado came right down through the little town at about 9 o'clock at night. So that was May of 2007. So the following December, we went down and made a presentation expressing a willingness to help by making a donation for as much as we could to do something for them in the rebuilding effort. They were determined to build back green and live up to the recently released LEED, which is an acronym for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design standards. So their strategy was anything Greensburg, the city itself, built had to meet LEED standards. We all agreed to live up to that standard, even though we were not being supported by the city with any funding. With the project in Greensburg, we built the first LEED Platinum in the state and have continued producing LEED Platinum buildings for the last 15 years and plan to continue that tradition with the current shelter project. This is the finished building called the 547 Art Center. To create the frame of the building, we recycled materials from a decommissioned ammunition production facility, which is a little west of DeSoto off K10. And at one time was the largest ammunition production site in the world at 10,000 acres. Most area residents here before 1990 would recognize it as the Hercules or the Sunflower ammunition plant. The poetry of repurposing a former magazine building for storing ammunition into an art center was a little too hard to resist. We demolish this entirely, leave the site clean, and are out of there in 2.5 days. We bring it back to our warehouse to build with. We're working now out of an abandoned nitrogen fertilizer plant here, the former farmland industry site in East Lawrence. We'll do this in sections again using a prefab size we came to like from previous projects, roughly 10 by 20. We take out the side of the building to get the units out, load them on flatbed trucks for the 8-hour trip to Greensburg, drop the trailers and look around. It is still a disaster area even 9 months later. This is the hospital. It's like right out of MASH. All the trees were torqued in 200-mile-an-hour winds, so they all need to be removed. We crane the units in place pretty fast. We're in the foreground. The other few buildings in the photo are pre-manufactured homes, and the water tower is also being replaced just beyond us. This is what the old water tower looked like following the tornado. The entire city is a minefield of hidden problems, as no one knew with any certainty where anything was anymore. The driver of this truck bringing concrete in for our foundation was certain he knew, and to his misfortune, was wrong. LEED is so comprehensive, it's impossible in a presentation like this to give a brief overview. Just to give you some idea, the way we mix concrete is a good example, as we have to add fly ash to the mix as a substitute for a portion of the cement, which was a new idea in Greensburg that they rallied around to make work for us. We poured over 25 truckloads of concrete while we were there. We used the concrete in the previous photo to create thermal mass to trap the sun's heat and passively heat the interior in the winter months. In the summer, when the angle of the sun is higher in the sky, calculated shading on the outside of the building helps prevent the interior from overheating, another LEED point we earned. We wanted the building to engage the entire community, so we welded a door the size of an airplane hangar to open out to the exterior, like you see here. And we elevated the building on a concrete plinth that was designed to be 16 inches high, or chair height. All the way around the completed art center, you understand the elevation changes about a ½ inch between Greensburg and everything else clear to the Rocky Mountains. It just looked unfair to the building to put it on the same grade, and it elevated it very nicely. So outdoor events were encouraged within the community. Unfortunately, I'm not able to document the annual performance of any of our projects as I stagger away from one, and in a very short time of a few weeks, I'm beginning another. But if we step forward 7 years to this little house on New York Street here in Lawrence that we completed in 2015, you'll get some idea as to how all of these considerations fit into the outcome to reduce energy consumption. The owner, Mark Eppert, states that his average monthly electric bill for an all-electric 2,000 square foot house is $17, of which $14 is the base fee for the service from Evergy. This sustainability stuff really works. These projects are built extremely tight. As an example, we don't want to compromise the integrity of the wall by drilling holes and openings for electric supply. Rather, we run the electric in the floor and avoid anything that might reduce the tightness of the exterior wall, especially on the colder north side. The only windows we could find to use at the time that would meet the performance spec for this house were made in Lithuania by a German company. You might notice the walls are framed with TJIs or simply a much thicker wall support system for much more insulation. In the photo, we're about to pressurize the interior to check for any air that might escape in order to confirm the tightness of the skin so we can fill in the tiny cracks before we begin insulating. The technology is significant and changes almost every year. Photovoltaics to capture the energy from the sun, along with generation meters to get credit from the utility companies, energy recovery ventilators to bring in a constant supply of fresh air, but also extract the warmth from inside air before being pushed out to the exterior, are but a few examples. By now, the program has expanded into a full year experience starting in 2009. However, having not sold 2 houses in a row during the downturn in 2008 to 10, it made it impossible for me to continue without money. So the dean suggested we consider a building we identified a need for on the West Campus. This is the Center for Design Research. We made this out of limestone tailings we hauled out of the dump at the quarry. I was enamored of this tight skin of stone wrapping around the building, with the exception being where it steps back and becomes a wall to help trap heat through our south exposure. This is the limestone quarry. I just mentioned how advanced the technology has become. Here's another good example. We install our glass here that is electrochromic glass. Now, this is in the Center for Design Research. It runs a low voltage current through it to create the shading. It self-shades as the computer that drives it knows what our GPS coordinates are and when sunrise and sunset occur, as well as the season. So it can control the shading to maximize the performance of the wall. It shades in the summer and lets the sun warm the interior stone wall in the winter. Here to the left is the interior stone wall, and on the right is a living wall, and I'll introduce you to another one here momentarily. So we followed that project with, in addition to Marvin Hall in 2015, that you see here along Jayhawk Boulevard on the main campus. This postcard is of what was called at the time the engineering building, built on the KU campus in 1907, which became the home of the School of Architecture in the 1940s when engineering moved to a new building, Learned Hall. Note the main entry is up to the second floor level, which remains the same today. We never had any way to gather groups of more than 30 students as it had no bigger space for classes. So students were taking about 25 required architecture courses in other locations around campus. Our proposal was a collected effort that included Rockhill and Associates and the dean of the school at the time, John Gaunt. What was proposed was to add a lecture hall off of the second floor entry that projected out into the south of the existing building. Here you can see we built what came to be called the Forum in the back of the 1907 building to accommodate nearly 120 seats in a lecture-like setting, as well as providing a flex room for jury reviews. We built on top of an electric service building that couldn't be moved and had to remain active as a portion of the campus depended on it. Yeah. The interior of the lecture space is accessed from the second floor, which is really the main floor of the building, and the stairs you may recall from the postcard climb to this floor. The original frame of the building was timber frame, so we echoed that construction. Over the course of the building's history, all of the infrastructure came in through the rear of the building, and the majority of it was abandoned as new technologies advanced, heating, plumbing, water, fire suppression, and more. Documentation of what we were discovering was never recorded. We augured with a 2-foot wide auger through all of it and went down 14 foot with 24 drilled piers. We do our own carpentry for the elevated concrete beam forms as well, and followed that with pumping the concrete for all of them together. We started assembly of the frame on site and boomed those in place. We followed that with an engineered lumber frame, and we get the roof on and install 64 solar collectors to generate most of its own electricity. Doing a glass building with students that have little to no experience can be a bit daunting, especially when you have corners made of glass that have to align perfectly. Setting the 2 outside double height glass wall corners necessitated tight tolerances from the very beginning. Also, there are no 2 glass walls there are the 2 glass walls creating an enclosed space that is about 40 inches wide that contains the louvers that you see here. So the glass you see on the outside isn't the only glass, because there's another set of glass duplicating the outside 40 inches in. So the louvers are in their own cavity, and they are programmed to track the sun and can be overridden at the podium. The airspace with the heat trapped is like a warm blanket in the winter. In the summer, the vents open and the wall vacates the trapped air up and out. We took delivery of the insulated glass units to our warehouse to outfit them with the clips that would hold them in place. We do that with structural epoxy that we bond to all 4 edges of the insulated glass units. This gives us a frameless exterior, which was appealing as it eliminates the 2-inch snap-on cover usually used. We hauled 165 insulated glass units to the site and picked them up with what we call the frog, which is suction cups, so that we could move them close to the interior. We hung the inside glass first, and we're going to work our way back from inside to outside, setting the louvers next and closing it up with the outside glass going in. We set the louvers next, all clear, all heart redwood. And then we follow that with the outer skin of the insulated glass units. And we set that with a block and tackle. With the scaffolding, we couldn't really use the forklift. The precision is evident here, as parts we installed months before have to line up precisely for the clips we put in on the back of the glass to engage perfectly. Then we finish the joints with silicone to keep the nice, tight, taut skin on the exterior. This is the room adjacent to the lecture space, and it's used for reviews of student work, and this is the finished room. And this is our new common space, a place that Dean Gaunt called the there of the building, a place for students to meet and mingle before and after class and other events. A space that's vital to the social needs of the community of architecture students that they never had before. We designed and built a living wall of plants for the back of the room. And this is a close-up of that living wall. Our projects are published internationally. It's a good story for the students and KU, as we have become the poster child for experiential education worldwide. We've been published and have had exhibitions of our projects in many places, the Venice Architecture Biennale being one of our biggest honors. So that's a fast look at what we've been doing, and now on to Monarch Village. When I started this program many years ago, I wanted to do something for the homeless, but figured out pretty quickly that I needed money to help them. As I have mentioned, I run 804 like a business, so now 25 years later, I have some money in our savings, and I want to help the Lawrence Community Shelter. The ability to isolate families is practically non-existent in the current setting. most typical family at the shelter is a mother with several toddlers and an infant. There's a lot of volunteer parenting going on, and it just leads to chaos. And this was before the pandemic. I offered to donate 12 isolation units for the homeless families. The LCS staff were overjoyed with enthusiasm, and so this is what my current project is. Renee Kuhl on the left, she is the executive director of the shelter, and on the right is Megan Bond, the development director for the shelter. We built a prototype for them to share with the community what we were proposing for the 12 tiny homes. This was on October 15th, 10 weeks ago. Now this is our building site. We're looking north to the back of the Lawrence Community Shelter building. The shelter is on 25th Street, just beyond the building, and just east of the prison, which in this photo would be to the left of the shelter. We proposed shipping containers that we would convert to living quarters, and McCarthy Builders of Kansas City decided to donate 12 new containers for the project. These are very clean, one-trip units, 20 foot long, into which we need to design living for up to 4 occupants and include a bathroom and a kitchen. So this is the plan view. You were looking at the back of that big black object there in the plan. That would be the existing building. And our plan is to create these 12 units around the existing community garden. We clustered them into 6 duplexes separated by an outdoor covered patio. This is an early rendering of the 2 units with the patio between, and a view from the other side. The layout has changed a little bit as we've developed the project. We've added vegetative screens to add shade to each duplex. The plan, which is similar for all the units except the one handicapped accessible unit on the left, you see the entry into the sleeping area, a tiny sink, pardon me, and refrigerator along the wall opposite the bunk bed, and the toilet facility with a shower and sink on the other end. It's only 135 square foot interior space, more like a large walk-in closet. Small, but better than the gymnasium open living in the current shelter. Oops. Here's what it looks like in a perspective view. The process took about 8 months with multiple, pardon me, submittals and resubmittals to get everything ironed out as to how the city wanted us to proceed. To their credit, everyone was behind the project, but everyone was also doing their job, and it just takes time for everything to fall into place. I am always working against time, as all 18 of my students graduate in May, and I have to be completely finished. So when it snowed in mid-October and I still didn't have a permit, I was thinking I was doomed to failure. So the process starts with just getting with the community shelter staff and then setting up a meeting with city planning. And of course, they bring in all of the vested interests. And then we go from that into having to have a special use permit generated. And that goes through both planning commission preliminary and final site plan approvals, and then eventually finds its way to the city commission. By that time, it was approved on August 12th. And then we start the process for building inspection and their permit application process, and that includes everything that I've listed there. One thing I was not prepared for was the need for this to have fire sprinklers, despite being 1 step away from a 3-foot entry door and 2 steps from an emergency egress window. Providing a larger service line to the units to accommodate the requirement and the required engineering costs was not what I had planned for. With the delay caused by the fire code requirement, I moved all the units into our warehouse and got underway fitting those out for the numerous inspections the city required, 5 separate ones before we move them, and then another 4 once they are on site. Most everything evolves around the code inspections and sequencing them, so it didn't take all the time inspectors had, and they were willing to work with us, which was nice. We moved them in on rollers pretty easily, clumsy, but we got so we could bring them in and position them in record time. I think something under 3 minutes was our record. We set these up to simulate the actual setting of the duplex on site and to show a before on the left and an after on the right. And this is in preparation for the open house I described on October 15th. So we wanted somebody to look in the void, which we see here on the left, and then take a peek on the inside. So this is the October 15th socially distant open house we held in our warehouse in the East Hills Business Park. This is the completed interior of the prototype and what all the others will look like when they are completed. I'm looking through the open window on the end to get the picture. Looking over the trundle bed, you can see the bunk bed on the right, both of these pieces we made in our warehouse. You can see the entry door on the left and a small closet with a tiny kitchen with a refrigerator, a microwave, and a sink behind it. The door in the distance slides open to the bathroom.
Brett, he'll be worried about you. Brett.
We have a better view of the kitchen here. And the kitchen again and the trundle bed in the distance.
Look in here.
Excuse me,
So
Gay,
this is with-
mute, please mute.
So this is with the bath door open.
Come in here so you can hear. These are the little houses that Rock Hill is.
And this is the toilet with the shower to the right and the lavatory just
No,
behind.
I think
We
they-
are very,
Dan,
Yes.
just a moment, I'm gonna get that, let me speak to them,
sure.
okay? Uh, Gay, can you hear me?
I'm here. I don't, I'm Dan though. I don't think that's who you asked.
Go ahead, go back, okay.
Okay, I'm good to take it from here?
Yes, sir, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So our research indicated we may be the only shelter, homeless shelter in the world that has toilet facilities in the unit itself. And that is the big conundrum, is how to accommodate these units with the required plumbing. So here you see the toilet with the shower to the right and the lavatory just beyond it.
Has a bathroom, has a bit of a kitchen. And
So all 12 of our units are in the warehouse. Here you can see, and we're outfitting those. And we're getting ready for things we need to produce once we receive the permits. And permits in place, we're finally getting underway on site with an auger to drill the piers that would support the containers at their 4 corners. And we set the pier caps. And the steel frame we weld up simulates a container to reassure us the layout of the anchor bolts would be as perfect as we could get them in their proper location. Fill in the piers with concrete. Placing the concrete for the patio.
But I don't see the place. to do
Finishing
it.
the concrete slabs. Back at the warehouse, cutting into all of the openings we need on all 12 containers. Welding is underway for all the steel components, including all the furniture we'll make, the solar panel support frames. These are all solar powered. Handrails, kitchen and bath cabinets are in production as well. Here we're looking at one of the first bunk beds that we welded up, but we wanted to make some changes basically to lighten it up. Here's the revised lighter bunk bed for which we'll make 11 more. Putting our finishes on the wood for the walls. So here are the bones of the structure that will support the insulation and electric wiring, as well as the finished sheet materials. The walls and their insulation are separated from the container to enable the container wall to breathe with a 3/4 inch spacer that isolates the interior from the exterior. Also notice in the upper left, where the wall meets the ceiling, the exposed 2-inch copper service to the fire sprinkler heads. We've also reinforced the cut openings with steel frames that we welded and bolted around the sides of the cut out to strengthen the container. Here is the next layer that includes the rigid board insulation and the Intello. The Intello is a material that completes a system of air sealing and vapor controlling that includes tapes, adhesives, caulking, and gaskets, and gives long-lasting air tightness. Going back to the improved technology, we provide heating and air conditioning with a mini split that is mounted over the 2 windows you see in the photograph. To just the left of that, you might be able to make out a circle that's cut out. And that is for one of 2 Lunos fans. The other is on the other side of the 2 windows, creating a ductless, simple, and highly efficient heat recovery system. This is an example of advances in technology I mentioned earlier. The system is based on 2 6-inch tubes mounted through the exterior walls. And as you can see, one of them in the opening, each tube contains a fan and a ceramic heat recovery element that temporarily stores heat. The regenerative core is charged every 70 seconds, after which the fan reverses and the incoming air absorbs the stored heat on its way in. So there are 2 fans that are constantly running. They're absolutely quiet, but they are running in an effort to bring fresh air in, take the air that's being pushed out, and take the heat out of that air before it's pushed out. So that's an example of the advances in technology. So this is where we hope to be after moving the units onto the site.
Unmute.
Gotcha. Okay, so this is where we hope to be after moving the units into the site within the next couple of months and building the landscape screens you see in this rendering to create the shade. So what the future holds for our continued work with the homeless, which I would like to do, is to explore building shelters on wheels. This is one thing we've been in discussions with the community shelter about. Most of the homeless are men, not all, but many are individual men. These could be self-sufficient units with a place to sleep, a little electric charging capability for phones and maybe a light, possibly even a heater, and then some water to wash with. We even have the same unit with a toilet and shower designed, but it may become price prohibitive. So we're kind of interested in continuing in this effort, but the idea is to basically bring the housing to the homeless. I think the full effect of the pandemic will be felt very soon, with homelessness becoming an even greater problem than we see it as now. One deficiency in the project we have underway is the location out on East 25th Street. It's a considerable distance from the urban core where most of the services the homeless population needs are located. So again, in conversations I've had with the shelter, we imagine if we bring the trailers temporarily to them, we could also consider bringing the services to the homeless population rather than having them come to the community shelter. So you can see in this rendering, we've suggested a converted vehicle that could provide medical, social service needs, food to the population in the camp. I'd like to consider this for a project for our next year or something similar. But for now, I'd be happy to get through COVID and move on to the future. Thank you. I'm happy to address any questions you might want to ask.
Yeah, thank you. Let me get,
I can get that. Sure.
I need to get here unmuted. Okay. Can you hear me, Dan?
I can.
You can't hear me?
I can. I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Second here.
You going to ask the questions then?
Yeah. I've got one question. I have a couple of questions. is the insulation system suitable for any building, or is this system applied in metal buildings only? Wouldn't it be great to use the large shelter space for services and not to house the homeless?
That's possible. It was very difficult to get sufficient insulation that we would apply to our own residential standards. In other words, a 2,000 square foot house or something. Uh, every inch of insulation compromised room that we would add to take away from the interior, so much so that we even had to make the mattresses more narrow so that we could have an aisle to walk back to the toilet, if you will. And so all of those dimensions, every inch was precious. Because the units are so small, we were able to get through what's called a res check or com check, the requirement that we needed to meet for thermal performance by the city. But it was only because it was that small. We do what you're suggesting with that insulation ordinarily now on the outside of our buildings. Our buildings are super insulated, as you might assume. Not the homeless ones right here, but we've got plenty of insulation in there for what we're trying to accomplish. So good question.
Another question is, how much does one tiny home cost in sum?
Well, that's a little hard for me to say right now. I'm assuming the question is not how much does the naked container cost, but how much when it's all finished out. You know, in the end, not including the infrastructure, my guess is we'll have probably 30,000 in each one. But they're also housing, 4 people. But that's a guess. Where we have had tremendous support from the community. I've worked with many of the contractors for 40 years, and they were quick to contact me and say, hey, we want to help out. This is a great project. We want to be part of it. So Lynn Electric, Action Plumbing, Scott Temperature, tremendous contributors to this project. It's not free, but I know what they're bringing to it, and it helps us quite a bit. So, but it still costs material-wise. It still costs something.
I wonder if you would kind of comment as you look towards the future, as we move, hopefully, even within the next 10 years, to move off of fossil fuel to renewable energy, et cetera. Do you think that builders as well as architects are moving as fast as needed in terms of what we're facing, which is really a crisis, it seems, in terms of climate change, et cetera?
No, I don't think people are moving as quickly as they should. Yeah, it's not a good situation that we're in. I think we all know that. I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'm always surprised at missed opportunities that I see. And, it does come with an added cost. It's not a great expense, but it does come with an added cost. A good analogy for me to make is when I did the project in Greensburg, which was 2008, so 12 years ago. The photovoltaics and the wind turbines in that project cost us about $40,000. And in the house I showed you that I was explaining about, Mark Eppert's house on 1301 New York, that solar system there cost about a little over $10,000. But the payback you can appreciate with it being as little as, $17 a month, I said, for an all-electric house. But I'm surprised that more people aren't embracing it. Of course, it is more expensive up front. I think other parts of the country, the East and West Coast, are a little faster to come after it than we are. And perhaps that's because their utility costs are so much greater there than perhaps here.
There's another question here that's coming. What is the most cost-effective building material if we were to take on a project not using storage containers? She's wondering about the exterior material as well as considerations for interior and climate saving.
I think right now the most cost-effective thing, for at least what I'm doing, if you're asking, is storage containers. I mean, those containers, we could have, if I had to buy them and I wasn't so fussy about making sure they were just one-trip containers, we could get those for $1,500. You can't put a roof, you can't frame and put a roof on, you get interior, exterior finishes, etc. And I'm quite pleased with the interior. I think we've dispelled a lot of, naysayers. People would say, a shipping container, how is that going to be nice? The interiors are really quite nice. And so we've gone that far, and also shrouding them purposely to cool them with the vegetative screens that we've put up around them on each side, I think is a step in the right direction. If that's the subtext of your question, I really don't know of anything else that we could have done this kind of a project with. It's just too expensive to build.
Mm-hmm. But does your facility where homes are being built sell homes to the general public?
No. They're all always ad hoc for whatever need we're facing, whatever project we're producing. We were asked, you may recall when I introduced the prefab buildings that we did, that we took to Kansas City, the Home of the Year Award, et cetera. We were asked, after everything was published, New York Times, et cetera, to license those. And you get tangled up in intellectual property rights, believe it or not, and it gets pretty cumbersome, and it's hardly worth the grief. I'm happy to do what I do as I have been doing it. I don't see any advantage to. I'm not going to get students to do that where they're building the same thing over and over again. The sort of magic of how this works is it's the genesis of it is their baby. It's a tremendous example of entrepreneurial work, and I, to the right audience, broadcast it as a solution for a lot of higher education. Put them to work, teach them how to do something. They love it, and especially if they're invested in it. As I've said, it's their baby. I mean, I have a tremendous amount of influence on the design, but in the end, it's their hard labor, and they have a lot to be proud of. They're hardworking kids. They just need to be shepherded in the right direction. And so I think something could come of it, but I just know from my experience, I wouldn't get very far if it wasn't something that they could put their design ideas into as well. So good question.
Well, the person that's asking is, are there comparable projects to design and build sustainable and affordable housing elsewhere in the U.S. that you know of?
Yeah, there are. You'd have a bit of a challenge looking for them. There are organizations. I think if you went to Lead for Homes, which would be a website, you could probably find examples across the country. Likewise, if you went to the Passive House Institute of America, Passive House, Mark Eppert's house that I was bragging about is LEED certified, but it's also Passive House certified. They don't take any prisoners. That's a really tough program. We've gone through quite a few of those Passive House certifications, and you change the frame on a window and you're no longer Passive House certified. It's that kind of thing. It's very, very rigorous in its standard. But if you go to their website, you could see other examples, I'm sure, of Passive House Institute. It's PHIUS is what you want to look for. And they would be a great source for a lot of what I'm describing here, sharing with you.
Well, this is in a way some maybe duplicate, Dan, but this person is asking, she really likes and loves your project and what it has done, but wants to know if we were wanting to build small, tiny homes for people with low income to take possession to maintain and build equity as the goal. What would you recommend for building type and material in that case?
Well, unfortunately, I go back to the metal. It may not be complete like a container, but the metal is maintenance free. I mean, that's the first thing that I think most people want to gravitate toward is some degree of maintenance freedom. There's also fiber cement, the James Hardie Corporation fiber board that would also be worth considering, but it's a little more labor intensive. With metal, you just put up sheets. With the fiber cement, it would be more like a shingle that you could put up, or you can also put it up in larger sheets. So again, there's not an easy answer to any of these things. I think if you were to look at what Habitat for Humanity is doing, those are probably rock bottom in terms of their cost, with it being material and installation combined. What's going to be the best for a homeowner that's just dabbling in the idea of maybe doing something on their own. So.
Mhm. Okay, here's one. Oh, let me see here. It just came on. How much
I did
electricity?
I did read that. If
Okay.
it's I can take it from what I read.
Oh, sure.
So we are producing with 3 PVs on the roofs of each of these containers. We are producing enough energy to not be reliant on the energy provider, Evergy in this case. We are tied into the system. It's with a generation meter, or will be tied in. That's, and I seem like I'm trying to be so evasive for everyone, but it all depends on who's occupying them and what is on and what's off, and who thinks they're too cold or too hot, and what the temperature is set at. There are so many variables there, but we've designed them to accommodate the majority of electrical needs for reasonable people. So, and at some point, we would need to split hairs over what's reasonable and what's not reasonable.
Yeah. Dan, if you were to have somebody ask you a question that hasn't been asked, what would be a good one that you'd like to be answering?
Well, I feel as if the effort that we have made here is has a way to go. Since I've started with this, I've had an opportunity to visit with, through the community shelter, their contacts. And frankly, it's embarrassing to see how we have dealt with the homeless population. First of all, I'm not sure if people have been here long enough to go, but I believe it was close to 20 years ago. They just bulldozed the whole encampment, which was down over off New Jersey, and that would have been behind the 1950 Santa Fe station back in there. And I think we just tried to make it go away, and it ends up out on 25th Street. I've been in conference calls with Denver as an example. They have an amazing program. The problem is that nobody wants it in their backyard. We understand that. And they've set up a system where they've worked with developers who are holding property in the closer to the heart, the inner city, if you will, where we need to try to get. And they've worked with developers who are waiting for the price of their property to improve, if you will, waiting for the right project to come along. And they'll sign a 3 or 4 or 5 year lease to go ahead and do an installment of tiny homes. And they bring them in, they set them in there, they create a tiny home village on these sites, and that knowing fully well that they'll remove them a few years later. They have a streamlined process with the city through both zoning and building inspection. We didn't run into that here. Everybody was doing their job. I understand, and I compliment them, and I appreciate it. But we have a long way to go. And I think we're just getting started here. And I would really like to see more attention paid. We shouldn't be the only ones. We're like a school program, There's other organizations out there that can surely help out. And so, what I'm giving to it really comes off the sweat of my back and my students. And, we see the need. And I think we all need to kind of see what's going to happen to us here. This pandemic thing is going to really change our view of the homeless. I don't see this improving in any way. And all the projections are another 300,000 to 400,000 people are going to be homeless within the next couple of months, unless we really start to take this seriously. Anyway, I apologize, I'm preaching. So anyway, so I that's my conclusion. I want to continue, and I would hope other people encourage us to continue doing the same. So thank you.
Well, there's been a question, a website that we can access that tracks the energy usage for this shelter project?
Well, there is, but with all of these programs, and there are a lot out there, you may remember I jokingly said I stagger away from these projects. I just don't have the time to invest my time in, I want to keep moving forward, and I have to pick and choose what it is that I take on. There are websites you can now, even with the PV systems, you can monitor exactly, you can watch each PV unit and see exactly with the software that's available, what the performance of that panel is, along with its neighbors, the other two. In this case, we have 3 on each roof. I don't have that kind of time available to me, but there are. We have done that on our houses in the past, and then we turn that over to those people that are in ownership of those houses that we've sold them to. But for this situation, we'll try to get the community shelter people to perhaps pick that up. It's a good reminder that I should do that, but it's just a matter of who's going to pick it up, who's going to follow it. Like I gave you the example on Marvin Hall. Do you have any idea how difficult it would be to find out who pays the electric bill on Marvin Hall and what we've offset? I mean, these things are just, nothing but difficult. And I just want to move away from that kind of stuff, let other people do it, and continue contributing in some way with the physicality of our projects. So anyway, good questions. Thank you all.
Yeah, I wonder, Dan, and I know this is maybe a little bit personal on your part, but what is it as you look at your early life that moved you in this kind of direction? I mean, people do get into teach architecture and all those kind of things, but you seem to have picked up another kind of perspective. Do you attribute that to any kind of early experiences or influences in your life?
Well, my father was a farmer, gave a lot to the community, gave back a lot. My mom was a school principal, president of the National Association of School Principals for a while. And, I think there was always a lot in the family that was giving in some way. I just had to wait a long time to be able to do it. As I explained, I knew the thing for the homeless was going to take some time, and we needed to have the money to do it. But I think the combination of all those skills just led me to what I'm doing now.
Okay.
Anybody else? Questions?
Yeah, we got a practical one here.
Oh, boy.
It seems like the sewage systems are a costly aspect, large or small. Do you consider
right.
compost toilets or other types?
Well, if we do the trailer project, we would use compost toilets on those, $1,000 a piece. The problem there is who will maintain them. And that is a little confounding right now. But we would have water tanks on top, and we would be able to have a shower in those individual units and a composting toilet. But before I introduce that concept to the city or county or community shelter, I know the first question is who's going to maintain those for us? And so I don't have those answers, but yes, we have looked at doing all that. In this project, we didn't, because we had the infrastructure from the LCS there that we could tie into. It still comes at quite an expense. Just getting the infrastructure for only the sewer and the water alone is I think it's now $37,000. So yeah, all that stuff comes with a price. So we've stayed away from. In this case, though, we did on the existing shelter, that project that I shared with you, Monarch Village. There is water supply and there's also sewer that we're just tapping into from the existing. We have to get it there, and you might have noticed I was complaining a little bit about having to size the water distribution in order to meet the fire code requirements, which was something we hadn't planned on. So.
Well, we have a little time left. I just want to, first of all, thank you. But, one of the things that we hope to accomplish is to educate not only the faith communities, but others as well. But do you think there's anything in particular as you look from afar that the faith communities in themselves can be helpful in continuing and perpetuating more sustainable housing of this sort?
I think a lot of it comes down to education. I don't think we've done enough. I think There may have been some ears that perked up when I said the average monthly bill is $17 for electric. That gets attention. That's pretty good, but I think we need to do more, be it these kind of presentations or have other people begin to try and share with the general public the value of this. And I applaud what this program, for which I'm only one of many that have gone before me and also will follow this lecture series. But I think that's how it has to start. And you really need to work hard to recruit as many participants as you can, because I think as we all know, the future is in our hands and we have quite a problem here. And so I think education is the way to start, to get as many people involved as you can possibly to pay attention to this. I find students actually are sensitized to it. I started the LEED work in Greensburg at the encouragement of the students, because I was a little leery of just how difficult it was going to be. And it was indeed difficult, but it was the young people. They're the ones who said, come on, we got to do this. So
Well,
it's good to educate them.
I want to thank you again and let all of you know that this is recorded, and we're going to figure that out with the help of somebody more technologically aware than I am, but we'll preserve that and that'll be accessible. So Dan, again, thank you for all the time and effort you put on this. It's really appreciated. And to all of you that took the time to Zoom in on us this morning, thank you too. And I hope you come to next week. It's going to be very interesting. Just in case you need to be reminded, it's going to be how and why to tattoo greenhouses with semi-transparent solar panels. And that'll be interpreted and translated by PhD candidate Rebecca Walker. So I hope you'll join us again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.